Chapter 1. The Night Everything Changed. 3 years ago, my stepfather humiliated me at Christmas dinner, pulled my chair out from under me, and told my entire family I was unstable and obsessed with money. Everyone laughed. My own mother believed him. And that night, I walked out of the house thinking I had just lost my family forever. But 48 hours later, I opened my late father's old laptop and discovered something Victor never expected anyone to see. Nearly $5 million quietly moving through shell companies tied to my father's business. The man who called me crazy had been draining our company for years. What he didn't know was that I work in financial compliance, and once I started following the money, the evidence grew so big it eventually reached federal investigators. On the morning of July 18, 2024, agents executed a financial fraud raid connected to his accounts. Months later, the man who mocked me at Christmas dinner was standing in federal court facing prison. My name is Rowena Hale, and this is how the night my family laughed at me became the beginning of the biggest financial betrayal they never saw coming. The night Greg Dalton pulled the chair out from under me in front of my entire family was the night I realized something in our house had been wrong for a long time. Christmas Eve of 2022 had arrived with a quiet snowfall over Seattle. From the street, our house looked warm and peaceful, the kind of place people imagine when they think about family holidays. The windows glowed with soft light, pine garlands hung across the porch, and the smell of roasted turkey drifted out each time the front door opened. Anyone passing by would have thought we were celebrating together. Inside, the tension had already begun to build. My name is Natalie Mercer. I was 37 that winter, and I worked as a compliance analyst for a financial firm in Portland. My job was to study financial records and find the patterns people hoped no one would ever notice. At the time, it was just a career. Later, it would become the reason everything changed. When I stepped inside the house that night, my mother Claire greeted me in the hallway. She wrapped her arms around me with a quick hug that felt warm but distracted. Claire was 62 now, still graceful and elegant in the way she carried herself. Before my father died in 2017, she had owned a small art gallery in downtown Seattle and spent most evenings surrounded by artists and collectors. After his death, she slowly withdrew from that life. Someone else filled the space my father left behind. Greg Dalton. Greg was 54. Tall, polished, and confident in a way that made him sound certain about everything he said. In public, he described himself as a private investment consultant who specialized in protecting generational wealth. Within our family, he had gradually taken control of nearly every financial decision my mother made. When I walked into the dining room, the table was already crowded. My cousin Lily leaned over the centerpieces, filming a short video on her phone for her lifestyle channel. My Uncle Raymond sat near the window sipping red wine while watching the snow fall outside. Greg stood at the head of the table telling one of his stories. He talked about market instability, rising interest rates, and how difficult it had become to protect family assets in uncertain economic times. His voice carried across the room with the easy confidence of someone used to being listened to. He mentioned Montgomery Freight Logistics several times, the shipping company my father built from nothing in 2005. Everyone nodded politely as Greg explained what he called responsible financial strategy. I sat quietly near the end of the table and tried not to draw attention. Greg noticed anyway. He turned slightly toward me and smiled, the kind of smile that always felt rehearsed. "So, Natalie, still auditing spreadsheets down in Portland?" A few people chuckled. "It is compliance work," I said. Greg leaned back in his chair. "Right, compliance. So basically you watch other people make money and make sure they follow the rules." More laughter. I kept my voice calm. "Someone has to check the numbers." Greg nodded slowly as if I had just proven his point. "That must be thrilling." He paused and took a sip of wine before continuing. "You know, your father used to worry about you sometimes." The room grew quieter. He thought you had potential, but never really figured out where to apply it. The words felt strange the moment I heard them. My father had never spoken about me like that. Before I could respond, Greg pushed his chair back and stood. He walked around the table until he was standing directly behind me. "You just need to find the right direction," he continued casually, resting one hand on the back of my chair. I started to stand. At that exact moment, Greg pulled the chair backward. The movement was quick and deliberate. The chair slid out from under me and I hit the hardwood floor. The sound echoed across the dining room. For a second, the entire house went silent. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. No one moved. Lily's phone was still pointed in my direction before she slowly lowered it. My Uncle Raymond stared down at his plate. My mother stood near the kitchen doorway with her hands clasped together. Greg laughed quietly. "Careful there," he said. "These chairs are older than you are." The silence in the room felt heavier than the fall itself. In that moment, I realized something that was probably true for years. Greg controlled the atmosphere inside our house. No one challenged him. I pushed myself up slowly and brushed dust from my coat. "It is fine," I said. My voice sounded calm even though my chest felt tight. I walked toward the kitchen and filled a glass with water, giving myself a moment to breathe. Greg's phone was lying on the counter beside the sink. Unlocked. The screen glowed softly in the dim kitchen light. Normally, I would never look at someone else's phone, but something about the screen caught my attention. Numbers, transfer amounts, corporate account names. Years of compliance training had conditioned my brain to notice patterns quickly. One detail slowed my breathing. Montgomery Freight Logistics appeared in the transaction notes, my father's company. Several large transfers were listed beneath it. I hesitated. Part of me knew I should look away, but another part of me understood something important. Greg had spent years controlling the story inside our family. If something was wrong financially, no one else would ever question him. I pulled my phone from my pocket and quickly took 2 photos of the screen. Then I placed Greg's phone exactly where it had been. When I returned to the dining room, no one mentioned the fall. Dinner continued as if nothing unusual had happened. Greg resumed talking about investment markets and long-term strategy. I stayed quiet. Within 20 minutes, I stood and said goodnight. Outside, the snow had grown heavier. The cold air felt sharp against my face as I walked toward my car. During the drive south toward Portland, the road stretched dark and quiet beneath the falling snow. The images from Greg's phone replayed in my mind. Large transfers, corporate accounts, my father's company. Halfway across the Tacoma Narrows Bridge, another memory surfaced. My father's laptop. After his death in 2017, I packed his old computer into a storage box and never opened it again. At the time, I could not bring myself to. But now the thought would not leave my mind. My father believed in documentation, records, and preparation. If he ever suspected something about Greg Dalton, he would have written it down somewhere. The idea stayed with me through the rest of the drive. When I reached my apartment in Portland, it was after midnight. I went straight to the storage closet and pulled the box onto the floor. The laptop was still inside, wrapped in an old cloth, exactly the way I left it 5 years earlier. For a long moment, I simply stared at it. Then I carried the box to the kitchen table. On the morning of December 26, 2022, for the first time since my father's funeral, I opened it. Chapter 2. What My Father Knew. The laptop screen glowed faintly in the quiet of my kitchen as the system finished loading. For a moment, I simply stared at it, listening to the low hum of the machine and the distant sound of traffic outside my apartment in Portland. It had been 5 years since I had touched this computer. 5 years since the day we buried my father. Part of me expected nothing to be there. Another part of me was afraid of what I might find. The password prompt appeared. I hesitated for a moment before typing in my birthday. The screen unlocked instantly. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled slowly. My father had always been careful with security, yet somehow the simplicity of that password felt intentional, as if he had expected that one day I would be the one sitting here. The desktop filled the screen with rows of folders. Most of them were exactly what I expected. Business records from Montgomery Freight Logistics, shipping contracts, tax filings, insurance reports, employee records. My father had always believed in documentation. Every deal was recorded, every contract stored carefully. For nearly an hour, I opened file after file. Nothing looked unusual. Then I noticed a folder that did not match the others. Private Archive. The name alone made my stomach tighten. I opened it. Inside were several encrypted documents with long, random file names that looked more like security codes than normal titles. My father almost never encrypted files unless he believed the information inside needed protection. At the top of the folder was one file that was not locked. Video. My hand paused on the mouse. For a moment, I considered closing the folder and walking away. Whatever was inside that file had been recorded years ago, when my father was still alive and running the company. Then I clicked. The screen flickered, and a familiar office appeared. My father was sitting behind his desk at Montgomery Freight Logistics. The camera angle was slightly crooked, like he had placed a laptop on the desk and pressed record without worrying about how it looked. He seemed older than I remembered, more tired. "Natalie," he said quietly, "if you are watching this, something has already gone wrong." My chest tightened. "There is a man who recently entered our lives," he continued. "I do not have proof yet, but I do not trust him." He paused briefly. Greg Dalton. Hearing that name spoken in my father's voice felt strange, almost like time had folded back on itself. "Your mother met him at a charity event in Seattle earlier this year," he continued. "He introduced himself as an investment consultant who specializes in protecting family assets. At first, I assumed he was just another advisor looking for a client, but then he started making suggestions about moving company funds into new investment structures." My father leaned forward slightly. "The structure he described is unnecessarily complex. Multiple holding accounts, layered transfers, investment vehicles that do not need to exist. That is when I began asking questions." The video shifted slightly as he adjusted his seat. "I hired a private investigator to examine his background." My father's voice remained calm, but the tension beneath it was clear. "What we have found so far concerns me. Greg Dalton declared bankruptcy in 2014. Before that, he was connected to several investment partnerships that collapsed under questionable circumstances. In each situation, there were investors who lost large sums of money." My father paused again. "Several of those investors were older women who had trusted him with financial guidance." The video ended with one final sentence. "Trust inside a family can become a weapon if the wrong person is holding it." The screen went dark. I sat motionless for several seconds before replaying the video again. The second time, I noticed things I had missed the first time. The tension in my father's voice, the way he glanced toward the office door once as if he did not want to be overheard. Whatever he had discovered, it had worried him deeply. I returned to the folder and began opening the encrypted files. It took time to unlock them, but eventually the contents appeared. Private investigator reports dated between late 2016 and early 2017. The documents were detailed. Bankruptcy records from 2014, corporate filings from several short-lived investment companies, financial partnerships that had dissolved within 2 or 3 years of formation. The reports described a repeating pattern. Greg Dalton met wealthy women through charity boards and nonprofit organizations. He offered investment advice and gradually gained influence over their financial decisions. Then the money moved. Layered accounts, complex investment structures, and eventually the funds vanished. One name appeared again and again in the reports: Eleanor Whitaker. I read the name several times before remembering why it sounded familiar. My father had mentioned her once at dinner years ago. She had been a major donor to a Seattle Arts Foundation. According to the investigator notes, Eleanor Whitaker had invested nearly $3 million through a financial structure Greg helped design. Most of that money was never recovered. The case never reached court. The transactions were too complicated to prove deliberate fraud. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. My father had begun building a case against Greg Dalton before he died, but the investigation stopped the moment he was gone. The final report in the folder was dated March 2017. 2 months later, my father suffered the heart attack that killed him. Greg Dalton entered our lives shortly after that. Within a year, he was advising my mother on financial planning. Within a few more years, he had become deeply involved in Montgomery freight logistics. I scrolled through the documents again slowly. My father had been suspicious, but he never found the final proof, which meant Greg had been operating inside our family for 5 years without anyone questioning him. I closed the files and sat quietly at the kitchen table. Outside, the gray winter light had brightened, but the room still felt heavy. Images from Christmas Eve returned to my mind. Greg's laughter, the chair sliding away, the transfers I had seen on his phone. Large transfers connected to my father's company. If those transactions were real, then Greg Dalton had been doing exactly what my father feared. But suspicion was not enough. I needed proof. And there was only one person I knew who specialized in finding that kind of proof. I picked up my phone and searched for a contact I had not called in years. Naomi Parker. We had studied finance together in college before our careers moved in different directions. Naomi became a forensic accountant who specialized in investigating financial fraud. I pressed the call button. After 3 rings, she answered. Naomi? That's a name I haven't seen on my phone in a long time. Her voice sounded exactly the same. I swallowed and glanced at the laptop screen again. Naomi, I think I might have discovered something serious. She paused. Serious how? Financial records connected to my father's company and a man named Greg Dalton. Another pause. Then Naomi spoke again, her voice sharper now. That definitely sounds like something I should see. Can you come to my office next week? Yes, I said. We agreed to meet on January 3rd. After the call ended, I sat alone in the kitchen for several minutes. My father had begun asking questions years ago. Now the answers were waiting somewhere inside those financial records, and for the first time since his death, I was ready to start looking.
Chapter 3. Following the Money. The memory of my father's voice from that video stayed with me the entire drive to Portland. I kept hearing the same sentence again and again in my head. Trust inside a family can become a weapon if the wrong person is holding it. For years, I had assumed my father's death was simply bad timing, a heart attack that came without warning and left the rest of us scrambling to hold things together. Now, I was starting to wonder if he had died while trying to stop something much larger. 3 days later, I sat across from a man named Daniel Carter inside a glass office overlooking downtown Portland. Daniel had been one of the quiet geniuses in our finance program years ago, the kind of person who rarely spoke during class but always seemed to understand the numbers faster than everyone else. Now he ran a forensic accounting practice that worked with attorneys on financial fraud cases. Stacks of reports and corporate filings covered the large desk between us. I slid my phone across the table and showed him the photographs I had taken from Greg Dalton's phone on Christmas Eve. Daniel studied the images silently. His eyes moved back and forth across the screen as if he were translating a language most people could not see. After almost a minute, he leaned back slowly. These are not normal transfers. My stomach tightened. What do you mean? Daniel turned his laptop toward me and began typing. You see this pattern here? He said. Lines began appearing on his screen as he mapped the transfers. Money leaves your family company. Then it moves into a separate corporate account. After that, it passes through another company before reaching its final destination. I frowned. Why move it that many times? He looked at me. Because each step makes the original source harder to trace. He turned the screen toward me fully. This is called layering. The word sounded colder than I expected. Layering? Daniel nodded. It is commonly used when someone wants money to look legitimate after it moves. He began searching corporate registration databases and entering the company names that appeared in the transaction notes from Greg's phone. 2 names appeared repeatedly: Harbor Ridge Capital, Stonehaven Logistics Holdings. Daniel clicked through several pages of filings. Both companies were registered in Nevada. Both were technically active businesses, but neither one had employees. Neither had a physical office. Daniel looked up from the screen. These are shell companies. I felt my pulse quicken. You are certain? He nodded once. Absolutely. Shell companies can exist legally, but when they appear in financial transfers like this, it usually means someone is trying to hide where money is actually going. He opened another database that tracked major commercial freight contracts. Your father's company name appeared on the screen. Iron Crest Freight Systems. Seeing it written there made my chest tighten. My father had built that company from 1 truck and a rented warehouse 20 years earlier. Daniel scrolled through several financial records. These transfers began in early 2019. The numbers started small, $100,000, then $200,000, later $500,000. He paused and ran a quick calculation. The total amount moved through these 2 shell companies is approximately $4.8 million. The number seemed to settle in the room like a weight. $4.8 million had been pulled out of my father's company. Daniel turned his laptop so I could see the full flowchart. The lines formed a tight loop between the companies. Money left Ironcrest Freight Systems, then it entered Harbor Ridge Capital. After that, it moved through Stonehaven Logistics Holdings. Finally, it landed in private investment accounts connected directly to Greg Dalton. Daniel tapped the final box on the chart. This structure is designed to make the money appear as if it was invested, but the pattern tells a different story. Greg Dalton was not advising your family financially. He was siphoning money out of the company. For a moment, I could not speak. Daniel studied the chart again. There is something else here. He opened a separate document and looked back at me. Your father passed away in 2017, correct? I nodded slowly. Yes. These transfers begin 2 years later, which means someone gained financial access to the company accounts after his death. Someone your family trusted. Greg Dalton. The name hung in the quiet room. Daniel closed the laptop halfway. Before you confront someone like this, you need legal leverage. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a card. My wife is a litigation attorney, Laura Carter. She specializes in financial fraud cases. You should speak to her before doing anything else. That evening, I sat at a dining table inside Daniel and Laura's home. Laura listened carefully while Daniel explained everything we had discovered. When he finished, she looked directly at me. You cannot accuse a man like Greg Dalton with only suspicion. Why not? Because people who run schemes like this prepare for that moment. They build credibility first. They make themselves look trustworthy. Then, when someone questions them, they turn the story around. They make the accuser look unstable. Her words brought me back to Christmas Eve. Greg laughing, my family sitting quietly at the table. Laura continued, Right now, what you have is a financial pattern. That is not enough for court. So what do we need? Confirmation. She leaned forward slightly. If Greg Dalton has done this before, there will be other victims. Find them.
Once we show that this pattern happened to multiple people, the legal leverage changes completely. 2 days later, I sent an email to the one name that appeared repeatedly in my father's old investigator reports, Margaret Whitmore. According to the file, she lived in San Jose. I attached the financial chart Daniel created along with the shell company records. Then I waited. 48 hours later, she responded. Her message was short. We should speak. We scheduled a video call that evening. Margaret appeared on the screen sitting in a quiet living room. Sunlight from large windows behind her filled the space with warm light. She looked to be in her early 60s. Her expression was calm but cautious. "You said Greg Dalton advised your family," she said. "Yes. He began helping my mother with investments several years ago." Margaret nodded slowly. "That is exactly how he met me." She explained that she served on the board of a medical research charity in San Jose. Greg attended a fundraising dinner and introduced himself as an investment consultant who helped protect family wealth. Over time, he began recommending several investment opportunities. At first, everything looked legitimate, until the companies collapsed. "How much did you lose?" She hesitated for a moment. "Almost $3 million. The number landed heavily in the silence. I shared the financial chart Daniel created earlier that day. Margaret studied it carefully. Her expression slowly changed. "These companies, Harbor Ridge Capital, Stonehaven Logistics Holdings. I recognize them." My pulse quickened. "You have seen them before?" "Yes. They were part of the investment structure Greg recommended to me." Margaret exhaled slowly. "At the time, I thought the losses were simply bad investments, but the pattern you are showing me is exactly how my money moved." After the call ended, I sat again in Daniel's office, staring at the financial chart. Greg Dalton had not been improvising. He had been repeating the same system for years. Then Daniel discovered something new. He opened a fresh set of corporate filings connected to Ironcrest Freight Systems. A pending transaction appeared at the top of the document. Greg Dalton was negotiating the sale of a controlling share of the company to a private investment fund based in Chicago. If the deal closed, the company's structure would change completely. Tracing the financial transfers afterward would become almost impossible. Daniel closed the file slowly. Then he looked at me. "If you want to stop him, you do not have much time."
Chapter 4. The Family War. The moment Greg Dalton realized he was losing control was the moment he started trying to control the story. I understood that now. People like Greg did not wait for accusations. They moved first. They shaped the narrative early so that when the truth finally appeared, it already sounded like a lie. The first signal came from my cousin Lily. One morning in early March, my phone buzzed with a message from an old family friend in Seattle. "You might want to watch this." The link opened one of Lily's videos. She had built a modest following online over the past few years, mostly lifestyle content about family business culture and entrepreneurship. In the video, she sat in a softly lit room with a cup of coffee in her hands. Her voice sounded calm and thoughtful. Sometimes, the hardest part of protecting a family business is dealing with relatives who return after years away and suddenly decide they deserve control. She smiled slightly, especially when those relatives have no idea how much damage they can cause. She never said my name. She did not need to. Anyone inside the Hale family would know exactly who she meant. I watched the video twice before closing my phone. Greg had already started building his version of events. By the time I returned to Seattle later that week, the tension inside the family had begun to spread. My mother called me that evening. Her voice sounded careful, as if she had already rehearsed what she planned to say. "Natalie, Greg told me you have been asking questions about the company." I stood near the window of my hotel room, watching rain slide down the glass. "I have been reviewing financial records," I said.
There was a pause in the line. Then my mother spoke quietly. "Your father trusted Greg." The words hurt more than I expected, because I now knew the truth. "No," I said softly, "he did not." My mother inhaled slowly. "Natalie, you are creating problems that do not need to exist. I am trying to understand what happened to Dad's company." Her voice hardened. "You left Seattle years ago. Greg has been helping us keep the business stable." I closed my eyes. Stable. $4.8 million had moved out of Ironcrest Freight Systems while everyone believed Greg was protecting the company. "I am not trying to start a fight," I said carefully. My mother responded immediately. "That is exactly what this is." She ended the call before I could say anything else. Within days, the Hale family quietly divided into sides. Some relatives accepted Greg's explanation without question. In their view, I was the daughter who built a career somewhere else and suddenly returned when the company became valuable. Others were less certain. My uncle Raymond called me late one night. "I watched Lily's video," he said, "and I remember the way Greg spoke to you on Christmas." I waited. Raymond continued, "I do not know what is true yet, but if you have evidence, I want to see it." That was the first time anyone in my family had asked for proof instead of accusations. I sent him a limited portion of the financial analysis Daniel prepared, enough to show the transfer patterns, but not enough to expose the entire investigation. 2 days later, Raymond called back. "This is serious," he said quietly. At Ironcrest Freight Systems, another unexpected ally appeared. The company controller, Michael Sorensen, contacted Daniel after hearing rumors that I had begun reviewing financial records. Michael had worked under my father for more than a decade. He knew the company's accounting structure better than almost anyone still employed there. We met in the parking lot of a diner outside Tacoma late one evening. Michael arrived looking uneasy. "You probably shouldn't be here," he said. "Then why are you?" He hesitated. "Because I started noticing things 2 years ago that never felt right." I handed him the financial chart Daniel had created, showing the shell companies. He studied it carefully. Then he exhaled. I knew something was wrong. "What did you see?" "There were transfers Greg pushed through late in the evening. He always said the board had approved restructuring decisions. There was paperwork, signatures, everything looked official." He looked up at me. "But your father never worked that way." The words stayed with me long after that meeting ended. Over the next several weeks, Daniel, Laura, Michael, and I continued building the case. Every document revealed the same pattern. Greg used shell companies to redirect company funds. He relied on rushed authorizations and internal confusion to push transfers through accounting. And he depended on family trust to make sure no one questioned him. Meanwhile, the pressure inside the family continued growing. Lily posted another video 2 weeks later. "Sometimes the people who claim they want transparency are actually the ones hiding something." That sentence sounded like Greg's voice more than hers. My mother stopped answering most of my calls. When she did speak with me, she sounded distant. One night she said something that stayed with me. "Do you know how much damage this conflict is doing to our family?" I almost told her the truth. Greg had already done the damage. But I still needed more evidence before anyone would believe it. The final confirmation came unexpectedly in June. Laura called me early one afternoon. "I need you to come to my office." When I arrived, Daniel was already there, sitting beside a woman I had never met. She looked to be in her late 50s and held a leather folder tightly in both hands. "This is Pamela Reed," Laura said. "She served on the board of a medical foundation in Sacramento." Pamela gave me a tired smile. "I met Greg Dalton 3 years ago. He offered to help restructure several trust investments after my husband died." My chest tightened. "Did you lose money?" She opened the folder slowly and slid several documents across the table. $2.1 million. Daniel studied the papers carefully. Then he looked up. "The same companies," he said quietly. Pamela nodded. "Greg said the structure would protect my investments." Her voice trembled slightly. "I trusted him." Laura spoke gently. "You were not the only one." 3 victims, 3 identical financial structures, 3 separate losses tied directly to Greg Dalton. The pattern was finally undeniable. By late summer, Laura began assembling a formal financial fraud report. Daniel organized the transaction records into a timeline clear enough for federal investigators to follow. Michael quietly provided internal authorizations showing how the transfers had been approved. And Greg kept moving. He attended board meetings, he negotiated with the Chicago Investment Fund that planned to purchase a controlling share of Ironcrest Freight Systems, he smiled in photographs and spoke confidently about the future of the company, as if he already believed the story belonged to him. By January of 2024, the report was finished. Laura placed the thick stack of documents on her desk and looked at me. "He spent years building control," she said quietly. I stared at the evidence spread across the table. Every transfer, every shell company, every victim. The entire structure Greg Dalton built was finally visible. And for the first time since Christmas Eve, I could feel the balance beginning to shift. Chapter 5. Karma. The weeks after we submitted the case file felt strangely quiet. For nearly a year, my life had revolved around spreadsheets, financial trails, witness calls, and late-night strategy meetings with Daniel and Laura. Every discovery felt urgent. Every conversation carried the weight of what might happen next. Then the evidence was finally out of our hands. The federal investigators took control of the process in early February of 2024. The lead investigator assigned to the case was Agent Melissa Grant. She worked in a division that specialized in complex financial fraud involving layered transactions and corporate shell structures. Laura explained the process carefully. Federal investigations did not move quickly. Every transfer Daniel traced had to be verified by bank records. Every victim statement had to be recorded under oath. Every corporate filing had to be examined against public registries. Truth moved slower than lies, but it moved with precision. For several weeks, nothing appeared to change. Greg Dalton continued living his life as if the investigation did not exist. He attended board meetings at Ironcrest Freight Systems. He hosted charity events in Seattle. He appeared in photographs beside donors and local business leaders, smiling the same confident smile that had convinced so many people he was protecting their money. But beneath that image, small cracks were beginning to form. Michael Sorensen quietly suspended several financial authorizations tied to the shell companies Greg had been using. His explanation was simple and professional: temporary compliance review. Greg noticed immediately. Michael told me about the conversation afterward. He asked why the transfers stopped. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the auditors flagged irregularities." Michael paused before continuing. He did not like that answer. At the same time, the Chicago investment firm that had been negotiating to purchase a controlling share of Ironcrest Freight Systems suddenly slowed the acquisition process. Their attorneys requested additional documentation related to internal financial approvals. Laura suspected federal investigators had already contacted them. Greg Dalton had spent years building a reputation as a financial expert. Now, the same financial structures he created were beginning to attract attention he could not control. The first real shift happened in April. My mother called late one evening. Her voice sounded unsettled. "Natalie, investors at the charity dinner tonight asked Greg unusual questions." "What kind of questions?" "They asked about companies I had never heard of: Harbor Ridge, Stonehaven." I closed my eyes. The investigation was moving outward. Those names had once been invisible to everyone except Daniel and me. Now other people were starting to see them too. The second turning point came when Margaret Whitmore formally submitted her financial records to federal investigators. Margaret had trusted Greg Dalton years earlier when he offered to restructure several investments connected to her late husband's estate. She lost nearly $3 million. At the time, she believed the losses were simply the result of market risk. Daniel compared Margaret's transactions with the internal records from Ironcrest Freight Systems. The pattern matched perfectly. Money flowed through the same shell companies before reaching accounts Greg controlled. A few weeks later, Pamela Reed submitted her own records. $2.1 million routed through the exact same financial path. 3 victims, 3 nearly identical structures, millions of dollars hidden behind the same 2 corporate names. By early summer, the investigators had something they could no longer ignore. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Portland when Laura called. "It's happening," she said quietly. "What is?" "The case was approved for formal action." For a moment, I could not respond. Greg Dalton had spent years convincing people he was the smartest man in the room, the careful advisor who understood complex financial systems better than anyone else. Now those same systems were exposing him. The news became public in July. Federal investigators announced that Greg Dalton was being accused of orchestrating a long-term financial manipulation scheme involving multiple victims and corporate accounts tied to Ironcrest Freight Systems. The reaction was immediate. Charity boards removed his name from advisory roles. Investors who once praised his financial expertise suddenly stopped returning his calls. Business partners distanced themselves quietly but quickly. Greg had spent years controlling the story. Now the story was controlling him. That night, my mother called again. Her voice sounded different from every other conversation we had during the past year. Quieter. "I did not see it," she said. For a moment, I simply listened. "I believed he was helping us," she continued. The silence between us carried years of trust that had slowly been replaced by doubt. Then she asked the question I had been waiting to hear. "Did your father know?" I looked out the window at the lights of the city below my apartment. "Yes," I said softly. "He started looking into Greg years before he died." My mother breathed in slowly. "I wish I had listened to him." I did not answer immediately. Greg Dalton did not succeed because he was a genius. He succeeded because families often trust the wrong person when they believe that person is protecting something valuable. Ironcrest Freight Systems survived the crisis. Raymond Hale stepped into a leadership role alongside Michael Sorensen while the legal process continued. The company returned to the operating principles my father believed in: transparent records, clear financial approvals, decisions that did not rely on hidden structures. For the first time in years, the company felt honest again. Greg Dalton lost the one thing he valued more than money: control. The reputation he built over a decade collapsed in a matter of weeks. Months later, I visited the small office where my father started the company. The furniture had changed over the years, but the view remained the same. Trucks still rolled through the loading yard every morning, just as they had when I was a child visiting him after school. Standing there, I remembered the message he recorded years earlier. Trust inside a family can become a weapon if the wrong person is holding it. For a long time, I believed revenge meant destroying the person who caused the damage. Now I understand something different. Sometimes revenge is simply the truth moving slowly until it finally reaches the surface. Greg Dalton built a complicated system designed to hide what he was doing. In the end, the system itself became the evidence that exposed him. And if there's one thing I learned through all of this, it's that patience can be more powerful than anger. The truth has a strange way of waiting quietly until it can no longer be ignored. If you stayed with this story until the end, then you already understand that strength doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like someone refusing to stop searching for answers, even when everyone else believes the lie. And if stories about quiet resilience and justice matter to you, stay here with this channel. There are many more stories like this waiting to be told. If you value stories where strength is quiet but unshakable, subscribe.